Good morning, everyone. Wow, that's loud. Good morning, and welcome to the Net Zero Nuclear Pavilion in the Blue Zone at COP28. My name is Jennifer Gordon, and I am the director of the Atlantic Council's Nuclear Energy Policy Initiative. And I'm so delighted to be here talking about nuclear green bonds with Nicolle Butcher, who is the Chief Operations Officer of Ontario Power Generation, OPG, and Pat Dalzell, who is Executive Director for Corporate Affairs at Bruce Power. So let's dive right in. Nicolle, could you give us just a brief overview of OPG's Green Bonds program?
Sure. So, there we go. Hopefully that is working, maybe not. So OPG is actually the largest non-financial corporate issuer of green bonds in Canada. So we've been issuing green bonds since 2018 and have issued about $3.1 billion in green bonds. They're an important piece to finance all of our infrastructure. We've used them for our large hydro projects. And then just recently in July of 22, we added nuclear to our green bond framework. So that enabled us to go out and seek an additional $300 million for funding for our refurbishment program under the green bond framework.
Thank you so much. And Pat, could you tell us a little bit about Bruce Power's Green Bonds program?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Obviously, very excited to be speaking about green bonds in a nuclear context. And as a company, Bruce Power was very proud to be the first issuer, a nuclear company, issuing green bonds. So green bonds completely dedicated to nuclear power. And we started that back in 2021. It's important to note that we based our green bond financing framework on the International Capital Markets Association Green Bond Principles and Loan Market Association Green Bond Principles as well. So as we put this structure together for green bonds associated with nuclear, we made sure that we adhered to standards and benchmarks that were recognized worldwide as we launched that program, which has now built up to $1.1 billion in green bonds.
And could you each tell us a little bit more about the kinds of projects that are then being funded, or kind of who are the recipients of these green bonds that you're issuing?
Sure, I'll start. So as far as how we're using the proceeds, we have issued green bonds for our Darlington refurbishment project. So it's all been refurbishment thus far. We have not yet issued any bonds related to our SMR project, but that is in the works. So we are looking at expanding the green bond framework right now to include new nuclear, which will enable us to be able to go out and finance the SMR that we have under construction right now. As far as who's buying, it's interesting because of the $300 million that we went out for to fund the refurbishment project, it was almost 6 times oversubscribed with people, and 80% of the people who actually bought the bonds have an ESG mandate. So it's important because those people actually have significant due diligence that they need to do. To Pat's point on, we need to follow the international frameworks. They've done their due diligence and they've accepted nuclear as green and are happy to invest. So that's a key piece, I think, in really showing that these are valid bonds and that we're going to have more and more demand for them out there.
Yeah, so just to give you a little context on what's going on in Ontario right now, between us and OPG, we are refurbishing 10 units in the province, and that is a major infrastructure investment, and it really is building new megawatts in Ontario, right? That's what's happening. If we weren't doing these refurbishments, we'd be closing these plants down over the next few years. So what we're ensuring by investing, it's going to be north of $25 billion in the province in new nuclear megawatts between the two organizations. We're ensuring that we have clean electricity in Ontario for the next 5 decades. That's huge. At OPG, they call it the refurbishment. At Bruce Power, we call it our life extension program. And part of that life extension program involves a major component replacement, which is our MCR. We take the units down for a couple of years and we refurbish all the major components, as well as a life extension, an asset management program, where we do some of the other work to refurbish some of the components to optimize the assets and get more megawatts out of them. And part of that work is actually referred to as Project 2030, where by 2030, we expect to have, I'll go back to 2015 when we first signed our agreement. Our site was nameplate capacity of 6,300 megawatts. Over the past few years, we've optimized the output and we've actually brought the site up to 6,550 megawatts. That's a significant increase at an existing site. Through Project 2030, asset optimization, and some of the life extension work that we're doing, we expect that by 2030, we'll have 7 gigs of power. That's like we just built a whole new reactor on site just by optimizing the existing assets. So when you ask me what are the proceeds from the green bond going to be allocated to, they'll be allocated to all of that. The life extension work, the Project 2030 asset optimization work, any new clean megawatts that we're able to invest in and get out of the site to bring to Ontarians.
Pat, thank you so much. Nicolle, what's the next step for broadening the green bond framework, and how are you using this to be inclusive and to engage with First Nations?
Yeah, so we are looking at taking our green bond program and really making it a sustainable finance framework that enables us to not only invest in our own projects for hydro and for nuclear, but also facilitate supporting Indigenous communities in making investments in our projects. So from a Canadian perspective, that's a critical piece of energy transition. We will not build anything without First Nation partners. And so supporting them in how they're going to finance that is critical to our success. And so really being able to broaden this framework to include investments like that is critical for energy transition. And so that's how we see the next step in the program to really drive our ability to help with the energy transition.
Nicolle, thank you so much. And Pat, anything to comment on that question as well?
Well, I mean, I think Nicolle hit on it, right? Like we need to make sure that our Indigenous communities are part of the solution in terms of achieving net zero, and part of the and that there are partnership opportunities as we invest in key infrastructure projects across Canada. I think we've seen the federal government start committing to that with their recent fall economic statement announcement about more money, easier access to capital. I think we have to make sure that we're thinking of Indigenous participation at every level as we look to build out our clean infrastructure.
Pat, thank you so much. And I want to kind of talk a little bit about the Canadian government more broadly, which recently made nuclear energy eligible for inclusion in green bonds. And we've seen similar efforts, and I think also maybe with more attention around the world. For example, the European Union, the EU's green taxonomy, looking at whether or not in the United States nuclear can be eligible under a clean energy standard. So what is the significance? What does this mean for the broader nuclear industry to have the Canadian government support in this way? Nicolle.
I always get to start. Sorry, Pat. You can take this one if you want.
Go ahead.
So from our perspective, I mean, it was a major milestone for us. It really sends a strong signal to the investment community that nuclear is critical for the transition. Like, there is no way you can do it without nuclear, and that signal to the investment community is critical because we need them to be able to actually finance all of our projects and the many billions of dollars that it's going to take to get through energy transition. But it was also a significant signal. So Canada is the first country to include nuclear in its green bond framework. And so it's a very big signal to the world that we're serious about this and we're going to actually put the right tools in place to make it happen. And so, from our perspective, the Canadian government has issued an ITC, investment tax credit framework that will help us with our projects. They have Canada Infrastructure Bank that provides low-cost financing. So there's a number of tools they've put in place, and really the green bond framework and adding nuclear gives from a Canadian government perspective, an ability to continue to finance those and really lock them in as long-term tools in our toolbox.
Nicolle, thank you. And Pat, any thoughts on how Canada can perhaps gently encourage other governments around the world to follow Canada's fantastic example?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking of a quote here that you've probably heard by a famous character. His name was Kermit the Frog, and I think it went. It's not easy being green. Well, that's the case here, right? Getting the status and doing this work and kind of bucking some of the trend is not always easy. And it's good to see that Canada's gone this route. But, I don't mean to put this in a negative way, but I just want to contrast where we are today versus where we were just a couple of years ago when the initial Green Bond Framework was created. When the prospectus or their framework came out for the initial offering, the federal government had nuclear listed as not eligible for green investment, not eligible for green bonds. And it was listed in the opening pages along with tobacco, firearms, gambling, drugs, and nuclear energy. So, that's why this is so important and relevant to us, right? I'm not blaming the federal government. This was just the way these green bonds were set up internationally. That's the way investments were viewed. I used to work for our pension fund. There are all kinds of ESG criteria that were being developed, and a lot of them globally rejected nuclear. They wouldn't allow nuclear investments in clean portfolios. So the government just kind of took what was out there, used it as a bit of a template to form their framework, and there we were in this box of sin stocks, right? And so, as an industry, we really came together. I mean, obviously the tide was changing globally in terms of support. We know we can't get to net zero without nuclear, and having it excluded from green financing just didn't make sense. So the industry got together, in Canada in particular, and we had a very receptive audience with the federal government. They were willing to listen, and frankly, we got a lot of support from the provinces as well on this front. But they listened, they realized, this is true. We can't get to net zero without nuclear. We talked about what we've done in Ontario. We phased out coal in Ontario. Jurisdictions around the world are looking to phase off of coal for electricity production. Ontario's already led the way in this, right? One of the things that the investment community would say in response to our push was, well, yeah, but people aren't going to want to invest, or we won't be able to get the bonds out there that we need. And they were looking at raising a couple $2 billion. As Nicolle just said, we experienced the same thing. We were 6 times oversubscribed on $500 million of green bonds. And now we've issued between us the better part of $2 billion, right? The world wants to invest in these investments. And so, it's kind of these talking points, leading the way, taking action. Us going to market with green bonds, OPG going to market with green bonds, the federal government realizing we got to take on pragmatic solutions if we're actually going to tackle climate change. That's what's led to this change in thinking. And you know what? Investors out there believe it. And that's why it's so important to make these changes. We need to make sure that investors see investments in nuclear as ways to invest in a clean, sustainable way, because that's a requirement, right? They don't want to invest in things that are bad for the environment. They want to invest in things that are good for the environment. And frankly, at the end of the day, we all know that nuclear is a good, stable, reliable investment, as our investors have seen.
Thank you. And of course, everybody chuckled when you listed nuclear energy being included in one of these box of sin stock groups. But in fact, just a few years ago, I went to buy an ESG fund for my younger son for his college fund. And in fact, nuclear was listed as being excluded. So, I mean, how do we make this change everywhere? Do we have to kind of take the fight to our governments? Do we have to go brokerage firm to brokerage firm and make the case, or do panels like this, engagement like this? What's most effective, do you think, Nicolle?
I think we've spent a lot of time with brokerage firms, with bankers. It's an education process for them. And so we have a team that has spent a significant amount of time with bankers trying to help them understand. We've taken them through the number of tours we've taken through our Darlington nuclear plant, just to put eyes on the plant, what it looks like, what the used fuel, like the dry storage containers look like. Like it's just to give them that context, and then to explain, help them understand why you can't get there without nuclear. That's been another big piece. We actually have a model at OPG called the Net Zero Mixer. So it's what are the options you could mix together to get to net zero by 2050. And just for the record, you can't get there on solar and wind. The model actually doesn't solve. You have to have nuclear in there. And so we can actually play with the amount of nuclear and the alternatives to be able to show the bankers, here's the impact, here's the ratepayer impact of the different technologies, the ESG, like the carbon footprint, as well as the land footprint, which is something we don't always talk about from a solar perspective, and just how much land mass you need to actually be able to put significant solar in. So that's been very helpful, a very helpful tool to just be able to lay it out with the financial community and be able to help them understand why, when we say you can't do it without nuclear, they have to have some facts that they can quote to their partners in their banks to be able to justify it.
Thank you so much. And I love that idea of really taking the people who are working on these issues and showing them what nuclear looks like in practice. Pat, how has Bruce Power engaged on these issues?
It's a similar thing, right? We've worked with all the Canadian banks and a lot of the investment community in Canada. We spent a lot of time, but boots on the ground is one thing, but I actually think, like, when you think of why Ontario is, in a lot of ways leading right now in terms of nuclear innovation and moving forward, it's because we're taking action, right? It's climate action, not climate report. We're taking action on fighting climate change. And I talked about it before. The life extension and refurbishment that's going on in Ontario is proving that you can do large nuclear mega projects on time and on budget. We're showing that investments in nuclear make sense. That we have this history of cost overruns and risk. We're showing that it's not all about that, and that you can achieve a stable rate of return over a long period of time. And we're also demonstrating that we can impact climate change in real time. Like, I often tell the story, like, I moved to Toronto back in the early 2000s. And I will never forget sitting on a patio in Toronto, looking up at the sky. And I was from Montreal originally, looking up at the sky and seeing just this weird haze in the sky. It wasn't a blue sky at all. It was a weird orange dome over the city. And as you left the city, you could see it in the horizon. It was disgusting. As a province, we decided to phase off coal. We burned our last piece of coal to produce electricity in 2014. Since then, there hasn't been a single smog day in Toronto. Now you look up at the sky in Toronto in the summer and it's blue, right? This is how you change minds. This is how you demonstrate that this is green. It's by leading by example, taking action, and then bringing that to the world.
That's amazing. Nicolle, did you have something to add there too?
I totally agree with Pat that we have proven we can actually do nuclear projects on time and on budget. And when I think about, we're building the first SMR, so a BWRX 300, at our Darlington site. And when we talk about why OPG, like why is Canada leading in this, it is because we were able to do the refurbishments on time and on budget. We've built the project management oversight. We know how to manage a major project like this. We've built the vendor community, so we have supply chain that actually knows how to build nuclear components, which is not simple. And if you don't have that supply chain, it's very difficult to actually just go and build a nuclear plant. We have the partnerships with our constructors in our unions. Like that, the key piece on actually being able to do the work and do it effectively is critical. So all of those things really have given us the comfort that, yeah, we should be leading. We should be building the first one because we've made these massive investments. 25 billion in total has been invested in Ontario in the refurbishment programs. And so we need to leverage that. And so really it's just the next step is building that SMR.
Thank you so much. I was joking before this panel that we could have called the panel, "Why is Canada so awesome?" and "How can the rest of the world follow?" But Nicolle, I think you just answered that question. So thank you. What do you, to each of you, and with, of course, Nicolle first, what do you think is the significance of having just the fact that we're sitting here at COP28 in the Blue Zone, not in some far off suburb, as we've been at other COPs. What's the significance of the fact that nuclear is really here front and center at this COP?
Well, it was quite a moment. Was it 2 days ago? I've lost sense of time, but at the announcement, Pat and I were actually sitting side by side at the announcement where we saw country after country get up and say, we're tripling nuclear. Like that, I'm not sure I ever thought in my career that I would sit here and listen to that. And so, like, it is phenomenal that it's not just, little Canada trying to push nuclear, but country after country got up and said that. And so I think there's been, a reckoning of sorts where more and more people are realizing you can't get to net zero without nuclear, and that it is feasible to build new nuclear on time and on budget. And so I was so proud as we sat there and thought, we're in a different day to be here at COP and have that announcement.
Thank you so much. And Pat?
Yeah, so just continuing my theme of children's television shows, there is a quote from a movie I've seen time and time and time again. It's called Frozen 2. And if you've had the opportunity to see it, you would know that there's a part of the movie where Anna is just, overwhelmed with too much, doesn't know where to go, doesn't know what to do. So many things for her to overcome. She's lost. And she realizes that what she has to do is the next right thing. And I love that idea. Do the next right thing. You talked about Ontario leading Canada's role in leadership. It's really built off the decision at all levels to phase off coal, to life extend units in Ontario, now to look at SMRs, to look at new large build at Bruce Power, to look at the options of building out the system. And as we've kind of made these commitments and taken these next steps, doing the next right thing, we've been so proud over the past couple of years to come to COP, be part of the discussion, and actually see the presence of nuclear at COP really grow and increase. And that signing the other day, that was incredible, right? Like 20 nations signing on to tripling the nuclear capacity, by 2050. Are we going to get there? Well, we can sure try. But no matter what, we have to keep doing the next right thing. We have to push the needle on things like green bonds. We have to push more financial mechanisms. We have to push for better financing options. We have to push for a regulatory environment that lets us do what we know we can do. We have to keep pushing these things, doing the next right thing, taking a positive step, bringing it to the world and showing that we can do this. It's doable, and we got to take that next step.
Well, thank you so much, and maybe to your relief, I will not ask you to sing from Frozen 2, but I love that metaphor.
Or Kermit the Frog, unless you want to.
But I do love the metaphor.
La, la, la.
Because I think it's true that, when the COP meetings started, and we were in these far-flung suburbs, to just still keep showing up no matter what. And now here we are, I think, again, very front and center with this incredible declaration from all of these countries. Before we close out, because unfortunately we are drawing near to the end of our time, any closing thoughts from either on this COP, on green bonds, and what more we need to do?
Do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Nicolle. Let's keep the trend going.
I guess just final thoughts. I do think, we need to do this together. In true nuclear industry style, we are very strong collaborators. We're very good at figuring out things together, both, between Bruce Power and OPG, within the broader Canadian nuclear infrastructure, but also globally. And so I think for us to be successful globally, we have to be doing it together and aligned. So I think, the announcement a couple days ago is a great first step to show we're all in this together. We're going to help each other get there.
Thank you, Nicolle. Pat?
Yeah, recap, it's not easy being green. Do the next right thing, and keep pushing the envelope, right? Because it does work. We've seen how we've affected change. We've seen how nuclear is taking action on fighting climate change. It's not just writing a report about what could be done. We're taking action. We're investing in it now. We're getting the world to invest in it now. And that's what we have to do. We can't wait 5, 10 years to make stuff happen. We all, as individuals and as organizations, have to keep pushing the envelope. We have to keep driving, because we know that we are part of the solution. We can affect change. It is doable. We have to keep pushing the envelope on this stuff and driving forward.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Let's all go out and do the next right thing. Thank you.